So I'll just repeat that briefly. There's no political motive attached to what I'm about to say. It's based on the weekly reading in the Torah. The weekly reading this week is called Korach, and it's about the Levite who questioned the authority of Moses and Aaron. He questioned their leadership authority. His question was actually, he said as follows, that the entire community, the entire Jewish community at that time, this was in the desert after they had received the Torah and after they'd built the tabernacle. They were still wandering through the desert on their way to the promised land. And Korach had a problem with the fact that Aaron was appointed the high priest. And his argument was, Kol hakal kadoshim, everybody in the community is holy. Everyone is holy. V'lama titnasu al kahal Hashem, and why are you raising yourself up, putting yourselves in positions of authority over the community of God? Now, to a certain extent, you could think that his argument was, in a sense, correct. And the commentaries do point out, or some of the commentaries point out, that the argument that everyone is a child of God, everyone is made in the divine image, everyone is holy, is true. That is indeed the case. Nevertheless, Moses answers him and he says, Boiker ve'yoda Hashem, in the morning, God will show who is right in this discussion. What was it that Korach really wanted? What was he after? Well, what he wanted was that there should be no sort of social hierarchies. And that would be a very nice situation when there would be no social hierarchies, and that's the way it is depicted by the prophets in the future, in the messianic future, that there won't be social hierarchies as such. In other words, well, we'll see. We'll see how this pans out shortly. The idea, however, what he was asking for at this time was something that is not a likely scenario. In fact, it's not a possible scenario in this world. It is an aspiration for the future world, for the messianic world, but it's not an aspiration for the current world. Let me explain why that should be. First of all, there are various planes of reality that are created. There are various planes of reality. We've spoken about this many times, and these planes of reality are called the five worlds. The world of Adam Kadmon. The world of Adam Kadmon is the highest world, and the world of Atzilut is the next world down. Then the world of Beriah, the world of Yetzirah, and the world of Asiya. Those are the five worlds, or five planes of reality. In some formats of it, that you could have it explained that this world, the physical world that we live in, is the lowest aspect of the world of Asiya. That is correct. But in general, there are five different planes of reality. Now, what makes a plane of reality that plane of reality? What makes it that way? The answer is that the word for world in Hebrew is olam, O-L-A-M in English, which would be, in Hebrew, it comes from the word he'elem. The origin is the word he'elem. He'elem meaning concealment, H-E-E-L-E-M. With apostrophe between the two E's. H-E-E-L-E-M, He'elem. He'elem means concealment. So in other words, there are progressive levels of the concealment of divinity, the concealment of God. All of those worlds are created through concealment of one sort or another, but there's progressive levels of concealment. Now, corresponding to the five worlds, to the 5 planes of reality, the 5 levels of concealment, starting from the highest world, Adam Kadmon, to the lowest world, Asiya. Corresponding to those, we have 5 levels of consciousness. The highest level of consciousness, or what is called God consciousness, is the level of consciousness, or this level of soul, called Yechida. Y-E-C-H-I-D-A, Yechida. The next level down is called Chaya, the level of consciousness of Chaya. In other words, the level of Yechida corresponds to the very highest of worlds, to the world of Adam Kadmon. The world of, the level of consciousness of Chaya corresponds to the world of Atzilut. And the next level of consciousness, Neshama, corresponds to the world of Bria, and then Ruach to Yetzirah, and finally Nefesh to the world of Asiya. Now, let me just explain these 5 levels of consciousness a little bit more clearly. Let's start off at the bottom. The level of consciousness called Nefesh. What is Nefesh? Nefesh is physical consciousness, consciousness of your physical surroundings, consciousness of your physical self. That's the consciousness of Nefesh. That's the same consciousness, perhaps to a different degree, but it's the same consciousness that a conscious animal has. In other words, animals are not necessarily self-aware, but they know that they're alive. They can feel pain, they can feel pleasure, they can feel fear, and so on and so forth. And even in some cases, they can feel some perhaps rudimentary aspect of love, like certain animals, dogs and cats and so on, feel a certain amount of love towards their owners. Exactly how it feels, we don't really know, but clearly they have some kind of emotional attachment, let's put it that way. So the level of Nefesh is a rudimentary level of consciousness. It's physical consciousness or consciousness of the physical world. A higher level of consciousness, Ruach is emotional consciousness, emotional consciousness. Now, the emotions of animals are probably not in the world of Yetzirah because it's sort of a higher order of emotional consciousness. It's self-reflective as well as being having an object of love, but it's self-reflective. It can be self-aware, and so on. The next level up is called Neshama, and that would be called intellectual consciousness. Intellectual consciousness being the ability to form and to understand concepts, conceptual consciousness. Like, for example, a mathematical formula and what that represents, Pythagoras' theorem, and so on and so forth, and all of these mathematical ideas in physics, ideas in engineering, whatever it may happen to be, ideas in medicine, and so on. Anything that has an intellectual basis, even though it might be based in practical experience, but nevertheless it's extracted and extrapolated from experience. That is called the level of consciousness of Neshama. Someone asked me if Nefesh relates to the ego. The downside aspect of Nefesh relates to the ego, yes. The downside aspect someone asked me a question privately. There are some private questions, so if you don't see the question, let me just be aware that Nefesh, the question that asked is, I heard Rabbi Dovber relate Nefesh to the ego. Is that my understanding? Yes, to a certain extent, but that's the downside of Nefesh. Nefesh as it is, without being tainted, when it's not tainted with egotism, is simply physical consciousness of the physical world. Is a math genius in the world of Bria. The concept of mathematics would generally be probably from the world of Bria, yes. So anyone who is a math genius has tapped into that particular aspect. I don't think that math is all that there is to the world of Bria. Obviously, there's anything conceptual, including divine concepts, are related to the world of Bria. In fact, let me say what the Arizal said. The Arizal said that the soul, or the level of consciousness of Maimonides, was in the level of Bria. His consciousness was in the level of Bria. Now, some of you might be a little startled about that and alarmed. Wasn't he in the world of Atzilut? The world of Atzilut is associated primarily with the inner dimensions of the Torah, which the Rambam, apparently Maimonides, was not privy to. There is a bit of a discussion about that, but let's take the general opinion that he was not privy to, or had no general instruction in the world of the inner dimensions of things. In any event, the level of Chaya corresponds to that inner dimension of things. In other words, to the secrets of the secrets behind things, the secrets of the Torah, essentially. And, way beyond the surface of things. And that's a very sort of abstract level. It's the world of Kabbalah. And ultimately, that's the world of Atzilut. And ultimately, God consciousness, that is the highest level of the soul. That's the level of the soul called Yechida. Yechida means unitary or unified. It's unified. It's always in a state of being unified with God, with the Almighty. So it's unified with the divine consciousness at all times. Now, of course, we're not always aware of our Yechida, but every soul has these 5 levels. But what's consciously aware, what a person is consciously aware of, what captures a person's consciousness could be any of these 5 levels. Captures is the wrong word. Captivates is the word I meant. What captivates your consciousness is depends on what level you're on, what level of soul you're focused on. So as far as Moses was concerned, so his level of soul, he was in a state of constant dveikut, cleaving to God, which meant that he was from the level of Yechida, and the way he saw things, he didn't see them from the point of view of political gambits and political machinations and so on and so forth. He saw the world from the point of view of the divine will. The divine will, and let's say what God wants from us. A question from Yael. Moses was at the level of Adam Kadmon, yes. Atzilut is the level of Chaya. He was the level of Yechida. And Mashiach will be the level of Yechida, the Messiah, Messianic consciousness. In any event. So, what then was Korach's complaint? His complaint was a political complaint. We're not all equal. We have to all be treated as equal. The problem with that is that there are people on different levels of consciousness, and people are endowed with not only with different levels of consciousness. A person is endowed with all 5 levels of consciousness, but has managed to achieve, this is something one has to work on, to achieve higher levels of consciousness. And not everyone has reached the higher. In fact, very, 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 very few people reach the highest level of consciousness. Is it the 50th level? Actually, Chaya would be the 50th level. This is beyond the 50th level. So the idea, therefore, is that the statement that Moses made, Boker v'yoda Hashem, in the morning God will make known. In other words, if you will be enlightened, then you will know. Right? If you will be enlightened, then you will know. That's basically what he was saying to him. Now, Korach's problem essentially was that he wanted a position of authority, And he wants a position of authority, not for the sake of authority, but for the sake of power, not for the sake of his recipients, but for the sake of power. One of the tells that he wasn't really sincere is that, as you often find, when people make a complaint in the name of everybody else, then you know that they're probably seeking political power. For example, when he asked, why do you and Aaron lord yourselves over the entire Jewish community? We are all holy. So he's speaking in the name of the community, which was not really elected to do, or no one asked him to speak in the name of the entire community, but he was using the community for his own benefit, for his own ends. And we see this happen a lot. Unfortunately, with politicians, seems to be a very common thing. I'm not saying which politicians, but in general, people who are politicians are into that kind of thing. People who are helpers and really sincerely want to help others usually do not make blanket statements about everybody. They help the groups that are really disadvantaged or whatever that they want to help. In any event, what was Korach's mistake from this point of view? There is nothing wrong with having equality, but the equality has to be an equality of purpose that we're all trying to do to achieve the same thing. We have all been given the ability to achieve that aspect of the main thing which is relevant to us. What I mean to say is as follows. Let's take the human body as an analogy. It would be rather presumptuous of your foot to say, okay, I'm taking over all writing activities. It's not fair, speaking to the hand, it's not fair that you're going to be, that you do all the writing, and why don't I get a chance to do the writing either? Right? That's not right. I want to do the writing and you can do the walking. Now, everyone recognizes that that's just foolishness, right? It's foolishness. The proper action of the foot is when it fulfills its task that it was given. In other words, when it uses the powers that it has. The beauty of a true leader is not that he has power over other people, but that he brings the power out of people. He brings out their individual unique power, their individual unique talent, their individual ability to do what essentially nobody else could do, and that's why they're here in the world. If you try to do my thing and I try to do your thing, or we both try to do a third person's thing, none of us will succeed and none of us will achieve, the goal itself will not be achieved. What is the goal? The goal ultimately is revelation of divinity in the world, revelation of godliness in the world. That's what we want to achieve, all of us. But everyone has to achieve it given the talents that they were given the abilities, given the interests, given the level of consciousness that they've reached, and so on and so forth. And therefore, doesn't mean that one is more important than the other. Moses was not lording himself over anybody else, and quite the contrary. It says he was the most humble man on earth. And in fact, when he went to talk to Korach after Korach's argument, he went to talk to him in he came to me and he said, listen, let's discuss this. Let me explain to you where I'm coming from. And he refused. He wouldn't even listen. And the same is true of Datan and Aviram, who were part of that group, Korach's group. It's not that Moses wasn't humble. He was the most humble man on earth. The Torah testifies to that. He was a very humble person. But he was trying to create a level playing field, but not a level playing field. You have playing field, that's interesting. A level playing field in the sense that everyone has to do the same thing. Everyone has to be equal from a political point of view. And you can't really have that, because it's not politics here. Of course, you meant playing. It's not politics that we're talking about. We're talking about the ability to bring out from within yourself the divine revelation that animates you. And that's what brings the person to their to their sense of completeness, to their sense of wholeness, to their sense of satisfaction, of enjoyment of life, of feeling fulfilled, of meaning. To be able to bring out that aspect in which you are unique and you're not somebody else, and you can do what nobody else can do. That's what gives the person that satisfaction, that sense of fulfillment. Okay, so Moses therefore wanted to explain to Korach. Ernest asked a question. Let me just get to this question over here. Did Korach have any idea that it would be at the end that way for him and his family? Doing what he knew he had to do in order to bring advancement to all around him in some way. He didn't really bring advancement to anybody, or in fact, he brought the opposite. He and his bunch were basically swallowed up in a pit that opened up underneath them. He didn't bring advancement, but it certainly brought us a certain clarity, if that's what you mean. No, he wasn't aware that that's what would happen. He was a politician. He wasn't doing anything for the sake of instruction. He was doing things for the sake of personal and political power, which is a problem. His sons went on to be righteous. Yeah, his sons were also swallowed up but they remained alive, and not like the one who gathered sticks. No, not like the one who gathered sticks. That's correct. Okay, so that's the basic idea. The basic idea is that a person has to. We are all striving towards revelation of godliness, and that's where we are all have our opportunity, and everyone is on a level playing field because everyone can strive for a revelation of godliness equally, but everybody is going to express it differently in the sense that every soul is a different entity. It appears that Korach had a greater desire to receive than Moshe, and his intent was to attain pure bestowal from a sword level. I'm not sure that I agree with that that idea, and I'll tell you why. Because it says Vayikach Korach. Vayikach, he took that which did not belong to him. In fact, the Targum, the Aramaic translation of the Torah, says Itpalei Korach. Right? He split things apart. In other words, he didn't bring about unity. His intention was not unity. His intention was I see, it's a question. Good. Okay. So his intention was not to bring about a sort of a unifying influence and the bestowal of godliness from above. His intention was to hijack that for himself. That was his, very often what you accuse your enemy of is really what you're guilty of, right? That's basically modern politics today. Accuse your enemy of what you are guilty of. That's the latest strategy, it seems. So in any event, that is the story that I wanted to talk about. So what, therefore, is leadership? Leadership is the ability that certain people have to bring out the best in others, In other words, to bring out, not to give them handouts, not to give them political power, not to give them what it is that they want, but what it is that their soul needs. In other words, the ability to find meaning and spiritual fulfillment in what it is that they do. And that is what a true leader does. He brings out from the innermost desires of a person those abilities that attach him to his ultimate purpose in being created. And that is all for today. Questions I'll take. Yes. Did Moses know that Aaron was a more pure channel of the light? Yes, he did. Yeah, he did. He didn't know that. Okay, any other questions, ladies and gentlemen? I'm afraid I have to cut it a bit short today because I have to go somewhere. But so we have a system. 1 second, I missed that. 1 second. We have a system where people listen to opinions. You mean in politics today? Yeah, very few facts, mostly just opinions. Yeah, if that's what you meant. Yeah. All right. Based on the science of Kabbalah and these 5 olamot here that have a structure and 5 levels of sun, science of the levels of light, there are 4 only degrees of spirituality in Ein Sof. Yes. You perceive that Moshe and Korach, as well as all other characters in Torah, were actually spiritual degrees and not just individual human beings in this physical world. Yes, but that's true of everybody. Not only people in the Torah, but everybody. Everybody is that way. Everybody, every individual human being is essentially a degree of spirituality of the Ein Sof. Yes. They don't get the truth, no. Wonderful teaching. Okay, thank you. I wish leaders ever knew. Where did I learn this from? I actually learned it from my teacher, from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, because that's what he was all about. There's a book called My Story. I think it's actually videos. It's probably available. If you just look up My Story, stories of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, it's different people telling of their experiences. Just one that I recall right now was just after I think it was just after it was after the 6-Day War, and there was a general who was visiting America. He was actually one of the generals in the 6-Day War. He'd been accepted to Harvard for some course of study or whatever it was. He was in Harvard anyway. He was in America for a few months after the 6-Day War, and for some reason or another, he found himself in New York. I think there was a student in Harvard, or there was one of the yeshiva students went to visit Harvard, and he convinced him to go and speak to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So I tried to make whatever. Anyway, to cut a long story short, he got a private interview. It wasn't so private. There were like 4 or 5 other people in the room, but they were all brought in together, and so he tells the whole story of like what actually happened in that. It was supposed to be like a 2 or 3 or 4 minute meeting, something like a very short, because there were hundreds, in fact, thousands of people who wanted to speak to the Rebbe that night. So the story goes that the Rebbe kept them talking for about 2.5 hours, a small group of 4 or 5 people, and most of the time was spent on speaking to this general, and he was asking him questions about the Israeli army and about the tanks and about the weapons they use, and why don't they use this weapon instead of that weapon, and why don't they buy their machine guns from Sweden rather than from used World War II rejects. Anyway, it was very, very interesting, but there's tons of stories from all walks of life, all kinds of people, from artists to rabbis to generals in the army and so on, who tell their story in there, and you see that's what he did. Right? What the Lubavitcher Rebbe was all about was bringing out the best of each person in order to do what it is that their soul really most desired in this world. Okay. Okay. All right. Let's see. Okay. Any questions that I missed over here? You're going before you make yourself late. Yeah, not being late before. It's not the end of the world. But it's time later. Sure. Anyone can send questions at any time to KabbalahDecoded@gmail.com. Kabbalah with an H, decoded, one word, @gmail.com, and I can attempt to answer your questions that way if there's something that you wanted to ask and you didn't get to ask it, or at any time. You're welcome to write. Okay, have a good week and a good weekend. Shabbat Shalom, good Shabbos, and yes, I'll draw you a picture. I have a new writing pad, and we will use it in the near future. All right, everybody, I have to go now, and see you later.